The crystal chandeliers of Maison Azure cast a warm glow over the restaurant's elegant interior as Karoline Leavitt quietly entered through the side door. Dressed in simple jeans and a casual blazer after a long day of meeting, she looked nothing like what most would expect of the owner of Boston's most exclusive dining establishment. Tonight she just wished to watch operations as a guest, something she did from time to time, but unobtrusively at her different hospitality enterprises. "Table for one, please," she asked quietly at the reception counter, where a new host she had not seen welcomed her with a swift, dismissive look. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked brusquely, his gaze already moving beyond her, to the well-dressed couple who entered behind her. "No, but whatever table was available would be okay," Karoline answered cheerfully. What occurred in the next 15 minutes would leave the whole restaurant staff stunned. The new waiter who was put on Karoline's corner table committed a disastrous error, something that would turn a normal night into a time that the whole staff would not be able to forget. His snide comments to the woman casually dressed, whom he thought was out of place in such a high-end environment, would have repercussions no one could have dreamed of. Before we move on to this amazing tale of mistaken identity and humble repercussion, take time to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more engaging stories of great women who demand respect in the business world today. Now, let us go back to Maison Azure, where Karoline Leavitt was soon going to taste her own restaurant from a rather unexpected vantage point. Maison was the crème de la crème of Boston's upscale dining scene, with its hand-painted ceiling, its deep blue velvet chairs, and its breathtaking views of the Charles River. The restaurant was the elite's place to be ever since it opened only 18 months prior. Getting a table normally involved reserving weeks ahead of time, and the restaurant's formal dress code was the stuff of local legend among Boston's social elite. Few of the regular customers were aware, however, that the genius behind this highly acclaimed eatery was the low-key 27-year-old Karoline Leavitt, a Harvard Business School graduate with a hospitality management background. Karoline had amassed an incredible reputation in the business, with ownership of not only Maison Azure, but 4 other highly successful restaurants throughout New England. Karoline, for all her empire building, kept a low profile. She was seldom shown in the newspaper photos, turned down most interviewers, and chose to let her businesses do the talking. This practice had served her well, allowing her to walk among her own restaurants freely, without the automatic acknowledgement that could interfere with her fair judgment of operation. General Manager Frank Weber, Karoline's longtime manager, was out tonight for his daughter's college graduation. Assistant Manager Derek Willard was running the evening shift in his stead, his initial time running the floor on his own. Derek, anxious to please, had been especially strict about following the restaurant's rules. The newest staff member was Thomas Pelletier, a server with an impressive background from a number of Michelin-starred restaurants in New York. His technical ability was excellent, but Frank had raised some issues with his attitude towards some guests. "Keep in mind, Thomas, luxury is not just in what we give people, but in how we make them feel," Frank had warned in training. Tonight would test that insight. Karoline was at table 17, a tiny corner table, half hidden by a festive column, ideal for her purposes of observation, but deemed one of the restaurant's least desirable spots. Her host, having seated her, Brandon, had commented on her informal dress with a brief frown, but said nothing. The restaurant wasn't completely booked for the evening, so there was some leeway with enforcement of the normal dress code. Settling into her seat, Karoline watched the rhythm of service in the dining room. She saw little things: water glasses not filled at table 9, an impressively tardy appetizer being brought out to table 23, the sincere welcome with which veteran server Marissa treated regular patrons at table 5. It was exactly these things that Karoline appreciated about these anonymous visits. Thomas swept up to her table with the smooth glide of a seasoned server, but Karoline caught the slightest change in his attitude as he scanned her laid-back outfit. His smile was drawn on a fraction of an inch tighter. "Good evening," he said, his voice slightly cooler than she had heard him use with other patrons. "May I get you something to drink while you peruse the menu? The Chateau Margaux 2010, please," Karoline said, ordering one of the priciest wines on the list, a selection she had added personally to the wine list herself last month. A flash of surprise spread across Thomas's face, before he replaced it with a look almost verging on condescension. "That's a 950 bottle, madam," he told her pointedly. "Perhaps I might recommend something more suitable. We do have some nice house wines by the glass beginning at 18 door." Karoline kept her cool, although she detected the presumption behind his offer. "The Margot will be all right. Thank you. Just a glass this time." Thomas paused, almost as if he wasn't sure how to treat the order seriously. Of course, he eventually answered with a tight smile, "I'll require a credit card for the order." This was against the policy of Maison Azur for patrons eating. It required credit cards only for bar bottle service, not for by the glass at tables. Karoline was familiar with this policy, which she had written herself, but was intrigued to learn how much this exchange would progress. "Is that a new policy?" she inquired casually. "For specific orders?" "Yes," Thomas replied ambiguously, the innuendo evident in his voice. Karoline quietly set her Black American Express Centurion card on the table. Thomas's eyes jumped mildly at the unusual card, but he regained himself soon, his dignity catching up with it with a slightly more deferential nod before leaving. As she saw him walk off, Karoline saw Derek watching the exchange from the other side of the room. The assistant manager's furrowed brow indicated that he knew something was amiss, but he did nothing to stop it. What neither Thomas nor Derek knew was that this apparently mundane encounter with a relaxedly dressed customer was soon to become a turning point in the way Maison conducted business and serve as a memorable lesson in hospitality for all of them. As Thomas returned with her wine, his attitude had quietly changed. The Black Centurion card had obviously impressed him, but instead of adjusting his manner, he now appeared to have formed another hypothesis regarding Karoline. Maybe she was the rich relative of some high roller, but obviously did not fit in such an elegant establishment herself. "Your Chateau Margaux, madame," he declared, pouring a small tasting measure with practiced ease. His method was perfect, but the welcome warmth that should have gone with such service was not to be found. Karoline tasted the wine like a connoisseur who had spent a lifetime refining her palate. "Perfect, thank you," she added gratefully. The wine was absolutely superb. She had herself chosen this vintage. She had gone to Bordeaux last. "Will you be eating alone tonight?" Thomas asked, his voice laced with a faint note of pity that Karoline picked up on instinctively. "Only me tonight." "I see." He presented her with the menu. "I'll guide you through some of our less complicated dishes. The chicken is very easy to follow." Karoline observed that he avoided telling her about the chef's notorious specialty or the night's tasting menu, obligatory choices he'd welcomed other tables she'd been spying on. "In fact, I'd like to have Chef Laurent's new tasting," she asked. "I've heard his rework of traditional French methods stunning." Thomas's eyebrows arched a bit. The tasting menu is fairly extensive. 7 courses with wine pairing. It's a big undertaking at 3 per person. "That sounds ideal," Karoline responded. Thomas appeared ready to say something else, but clearly changed his mind. "As you like. I should note the tasting menu usually requires advance notice, but I'll discuss with the kitchen." As I concealed myself, he departed. Karoline saw him pause outside the service station and have a hushed discussion with Derek. Both men looked in her direction multiple times. Derek's face became increasingly worried, though it was uncertain if his concern was because of Thomas a guest, or if it was because the kitchen could handle a spontaneous taste request. From her corner table, Karoline could to observe the restaurant carefully. She saw sommelier Marcus, whom she had herself recruited, leading Boston hotel, offering warmly informative wine service to a party of clearly affluent patrons. His enthusiastic description and true passion were just what she preferred in her employees. The comparison to Thomas's perfunctory service to her was revealing. When Thomas came back, he told her the kitchen would be able to do her request for the tasting menu. "Chef Laurent has offered to cook it for you, though he insists on having me tell you that you can't have substitute." "Thank him, please. I'm eager to get a full taste," Karoline replied. When the first course was served, a subtle amuse-bouche with caviar and gold leaf, Thomas appeared to grapple with making sense of his original estimate of Karoline and the obvious sophistication of fine dining. His answer seemed to be a new strategy, describing each dish in painfully elementary language. "This is caviar, Caspian sea fish egg," he started, talking slowly to a child or someone utterly unversed in the world of gastronomy. "The gold on top is real edible gold leaf. It's simply for looks and doesn't taste of anything. Karoline nodded tolerant.
Yes.
I know beluga caviar. This presentation is gorgeous. Thomas was taken aback for a moment by her familiarity, but regained his composure quickly. The chef suggests sampling a little on the mother-of-pearl spoon that's made of a shell, not metal, because metal would contaminate the flavor. Thanks for the advice, Karoline answered, her face impassive in response to the unnecessarily patronizing explanation. Over the next 3 courses, Thomas persisted in his practice of over-explaining simple culinary principles in a subtly condescending tone. When Karoline inquired about the genesis of a given dish, he treated her with a patronizing, "It's a very sophisticated technique that would be hard to explain to someone without a background in cooking." What Thomas was unaware of was that Karoline had received training in culinary arts prior to attending business school and had spent 3 months working with Chef Laurent, creating the concept for Maison Azur. Matters came to a head when a prominent local politician and regular customer, Senator Williams, appeared at the restaurant with his wife. Despite having no reservation, they were ushered to a premium table by the window. Thomas, who had been increasingly inattentive in his service to Karoline, hurried over to greet them effusively. For the remainder of 20 minutes, Karoline's water glass stayed empty, and her 4th course remained untouched on the service stand, while Thomas gave his attention to the senator. Derek, who should have caught the gap in service, was busy entertaining other VIP patrons at the bar. When Thomas finally arrived, he made no comment about the delay. "Your 4th course, the poached halibut. It's a white fish," he volunteered unnecessarily. "The sauce may be a little complicated for some palates. It's a beurre blanc, which translates from French to white butter." Karoline chose to push a little farther. "The sauce has a curious note I can't put my finger on. Is there maybe a touch of kaffir lime?" Thomas grinned patronizingly. No, it's merely lemon and butter. Chef Laurent's food is really refined. He works with techniques and tastes many plain customers may not fully understand." Right away, this observation was especially ironic, considering Karoline had actually recommended the addition of kaffir lime to Chef Laurent when they were creating the menu, and it had worked its way into being a signature feature of his beurre blanc. The meal continued. There were 2 more incidents that tried the patience of Karoline. First, when she asked to be talked with the sommelier regarding the 5th course's wine pairing, Thomas waved it away with, "I can probably answer any questions you might have about the wine. It would be best not to interrupt Marcus as he serves the senator's table." Then when she'd commented on a mild difference in the heat of the 6th course, Thomas had replied, "The course is supposed to be served exactly like Chef had made it. Maybe it's just not something you're accustomed to." Our regulars appreciate Chef Laurent's creativity. By the time dessert had been served, there was tension at the table. Thomas had turned from condescension to barely suppressed annoyance, clearly anxious to get back to what he saw as more exigent guests. "And last but not least, your dessert, a chocolate soule with gold leaf and a coffee creme anglaise," he declared, depositing the perfectly puffed creation with mechanical detachment. "The kitchen would love your comments about this dish in particular, since it's new to the menu." This was Karoline's moment. "In fact, I'm well aware of this soule. This recipe belongs to my grandmother. I gave it personally to Chef Laurent when we opened up Maison Azur 18 months ago." Thomas froze, his face contorting in confusion. "I apologize that you gave the recipe to Chef Laurent." Karoline smiled and put out her hand. "I think we have not been formally introduced. I am Karoline Leavitt, owner of Maison Azur." The color went out of Thomas's face as he realized who he had been working for and how he had been working for her. He started to speak, but no sound came out. "Maybe we can talk in private for a minute," Karoline had suggested quietly, standing up from her seat, "and maybe have Derek join us too." Thomas only nodded stupidly, seeming like he might actually be sick. As they stood and walked toward the small private dining area off the main level, Derek picked up on the exchange and came over hastily, his face a combination of confusion and alarm. "Is something wrong?" he asked, glancing between Thomas and Karoline. "Derek, this is," Thomas started, his voice unsteady. "Miss Leavitt," Derek concluded, recognition and astonishment flooding his features. "I wasn't expecting you tonight. That was kind of the idea, Karoline. Let's take this elsewhere." When the two of them realized the door was closed behind them and they were standing in the middle of a small private dining room, Thomas launched into a rapid fire of frantic apology. "Miss Levitt, I don't know where to start saying how sorry I am. If I had known who you were," Karoline interrupted him. "That's exactly the problem, Tom. Your service of me should not have depended on whether or not you knew who I was." She spoke to turn to both men. "I built Maison with a clear vision to provide outstanding food in an environment of true hospitality. What I had as a guest tonight fell far, far short of that standard." Derek, clearly upset, interrupted. "Miss Levitt, I apologize completely. I should have been keeping an eye on service more attentively, particularly with Frank not being here tonight." "Yes, you should have," Karoline conceded candidly. "But it is more than supervision, it is about the very standards of hospitality." She refocused on Thomas. "You formed a whole set of assumptions about me from how I look. You concluded in seconds that I didn't belong here, that I couldn't possibly have an appreciation of fine food, that I wasn't deserving of the same treatment you gave to guests you considered superior." Thomas gazed at the floor, too ashamed to meet her gaze. "What's most troubling," Karoline went on, "is that you appear to think luxury service equates to condescension towards those you view as outsiders, while finging off those you see as influential. That's not what Maison Azur is about." She stopped, letting her words settle. "Real luxury hospitality isn't about building exclusivity on intimidation or discomfort. It's about making every guest feel respected, valued, and included in a superior experience." Derek cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Will Thomas be, I mean, do you want us to? Am I firing you, Thomas?" Karoline answered the unasked question straight out. "No, I'm not." The two men shot up in surprise. "That would be the simple fix, wouldn't it?" Karoline went on. "But it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Instead, I have another plan in mind." She sat down at the little table, inviting them to sit with her. As they sat, the dynamics in the room changed noticeably. This was now an owner scolding staff, not a leader involving her team in problem solving. "Thomas, for the next month you will be working directly with Frank on a particular project. We're redoing our service training program, and tonight's experience will be used as the basis for that endeavor." Thomas appeared perplexed. "I don't get it. You'll assist us in crafting an improved practice in hospitality by examining specifically what failed in your encounter with me. You'll write down every assumption you made, every service standard you enacted differently due to your interpretation of the guest, and every place where actual hospitality gave way to performance or bias." She addressed Derek. "And you'll work on this project too, namely addressing specifically how the manager can monitor and keep service standards up to mark consistently across all the guests." Both men sat there in shocked silence. "Also," Karoline went on, "both of you will dine one night at each of our 5 restaurants anonymous. You'll make reservations using other names, dress down and see our service from the other side. You'll take notes on your observations and impressions during each visit." Derek nodded thoughtfully, catching on to the strategy. "You want us to have what you had tonight?" "Precisely," Karoline replied. "Real empathy derives from lived experience, not training in theory." She sat forward, her face relaxing just a little. "I believe in second chances, because I believe that people can learn and grow when given the chance. But I also believe in accountability. You'll have 4 weeks to show me that you really do know what went wrong tonight and how to make sure it never happens again. Not only with me, but with anyone who came in as a guest through our doors." Thomas, who had been quiet, finally broke the silence. "Why would you give me this opportunity? What I did tonight, the way I treated you, it was inexcusable." "Not inexcusable," Karoline answered. "Just profoundly misguided. You have great technical abilities, Thomas. Your knowledge of service function and cuisine is first-rate. What you lack is hospitality's heart, and that's something you can learn if you're willing to put in the effort." She rose, indicating the conversation was nearing its end. "Frank will return tomorrow. I'll give him the rundown on the situation and your new project. In the meantime, I'd like both of you to head back to the floor and service as normal. We can hash this out more thoroughly in our staff meeting tomorrow morning." As they headed out of the private dining, Karoline offered one final observation. "Recall this sensation, the shock, the embarrassment, the confusion you're feeling at the moment. Many guests get a variation on this when they're treated like outsiders in luxury environments. Your job is to make sure no one ever feels that way at Maison. Once more, with those words, she opened the door so they could go first. As they stepped back into the main dining area, the atmosphere had clearly changed. Something had somehow circulated amongst the staff that the owner was there, and all the employees were now carrying out their work with increased sensitivity and accuracy. Karoline went back to her table to complete her dessert, and Thomas and Derek got back to work with evident discomfort but rededication. The evening service proceeded, yet something essential had shifted in the restaurant environment. A tangible reminder that hospitality at its essence is all about making others feel important no matter who they might seem to be. The day following Karoline's enlightening dinner at Maison Azur, the entire dining staff gathered in the private dining room of the restaurant for what had been declared to be an emergency meeting. Nervous excitement filled the room. Rumor of the evening before had circulated widely to the staff, although the particulars were vague for those who were not there. Frank Weber, the general manager who had just come back from his daughter's graduation, stood at the front of the room next to Karoline. His typically cheerful face was serious as he looked out at the group of people in front of him. By this time, most of you have heard some variation of what went down last night, Frank started. Instead of letting rumors keep going, Miss Leavitt wished to deal with the situation head-on with all of you. Karoline moved forward, assertive presence beyond her unpretentious demeanor. Thank you for your early appearance today. What transpired last night was regrettable, but it affords us a worthwhile chance to reassess how we define luxury hospitality. She concisely described her experience the evening before, avoiding singling out Thomas by name. Though most of the staff could guess who had been involved, she emphasized that the issue wasn't personal, but systemic. A subtle culture that had developed where the quality of service had become tied to perceptions about a guest's status or importance. The true test of hospitality isn't how we treat celebrities or wealthy regulars, Karoline explained. It's how we treat each individual who comes through our doors, no matter what they're wearing, the way they sound, or if we know their name. She then revealed what would come to be called the Azure Standard, a new service standard that would be applied in all 5 of her restaurants. The essence of this new standard was nothing more than this: service must be consistent, authentic, and unassuming about who belongs in a luxury environment. From today, we're removing any policies that create false barriers, she declared. Our dress code will be refined to be more inclusive. We won't require multiple credit card authorizations based on subjective judgments of guests anymore, and most importantly, we'll introduce a new training program emphasizing recognizing and eradicating unconscious bias in service. I was Rchiff, Scepter singing train dat verzim. The employees listened intently as Karoline explained the changes, most of them nodding. Even the employees not directly involved with the night before could identify points at which they had made similar assumptions about guests based on appearances. Thomas, who had stood silently at the back of the room, stepped forward when Karoline opened it up for comments and questions. His face was pale from what had obviously been a night without sleep, but his voice was firm. I'd like to apologize to everyone, he started. What occurred last night wasn't a mistake I committed. Separately, it reflected poorly on us all, and on the restaurant that Miss Leavitt has worked so hard to establish. I appreciate the chance to be a part of making things right. He turned to speak to Karoline. The way I treated you was unacceptable. I made assumptions that were not only incorrect, but directly opposite to what genuine hospitality is. I want you all to know that I'm dedicated to the project M. Leavitt has tasked, and I hope what I learned can help see that nothing like this occurs again. His candor appeared to dissipate tension in the room. Several other employees started sharing their own observations of times they had made similar judgments or had given different amounts of service based on appearance. Marika, the seasoned server Karoline had seen give warm, sincere service, the previous night made an observation that applied to everyone. Luxury isn't about making some feel special by making others feel inferior. It's about designing an atmosphere where every individual feels valued. As the meeting came to a close, Karoline made one final announcement. Every month, each employee would get a meal as a guest at one of their restaurants, in casual attire and without disclosing their affiliation with the restaurant. These visits would serve as the foundation for regular discussion regarding service enhancement. "We're not in the business of serving great food," Karoline reminded them as they got set to open for lunch service. "We're in the business of delivering experiences that make guests feel valued and respected. That's the real luxury we provide." Throughout the ensuing months, the change at Maison Azur and Karoline's other restaurants was astonishing. The Azur standard became the foundation of their hospitality philosophy, and tales of the open-minded true service at her properties began to circulate in Boston's culinary culture. Thomas himself surprisingly became a strong supporter of the new way. The assignment he had first considered a punishment turned into a cause. Collaborating closely with Frank, he created training scenarios from his experience and assisted other staff members in identifying their own unconscious biases. 6 months subsequent to the incident, Boston Magazine published a cover story entitled "Redefining Luxury: How Karoline Leavitt is Changing Fine Dining." The story covered the Azur standard and its influence on guest experiences, including the unorthodox background of its creation. Although Karoline asked that Thomas keep his name out of the retelling, the most significant result, though, was the handwritten letter Karoline got from an older lady who had eaten at Maison Azur with her granddaughter to celebrate the graduation of the young lady from college. "For years I've stayed away from fine dining restaurants because I never felt included in them. Last night at your restaurant, it was different. Your employees treated us like family, never making me feel that my modest attire or lack of knowledge about certain dishes was an issue. Thank you for making a haven where luxury doesn't equal exclusivity, but instead equals gentleness." A year after the critical evening when a server had outraged the owner by insulting her without realizing who she was, Maison Azur celebrated a special dinner to commemorate the first anniversary of the Azur standard. The evening was attended by staff from all 5 of the restaurants, business leaders, and loyal guests of all backgrounds. As Karoline spoke to the crowd, she took a moment to remember the lesson that had revolutionized her business from the inside out. Authentic luxury isn't something based on who we keep out, but on how we invite people in. It isn't quantified through prices or exclusivity, but in what makes people feel. And above all, it's not about seeing importance in others, but seeing the inherent worth in everyone who walks through our door. Thomas, having been promoted to service trainer for all 5 restaurants, stood among his peers with a renewed sense of direction. His biggest professional mistake had become the impetus for his biggest development and for a movement that was slowly revolutionizing luxury hospitality across the board. Karoline Levit's restaurants kept on succeeding, not in spite of their more embracing attitude, but because of it. The reservation waiting list lengthened as the word spread about restaurants where outstanding food was complemented by truly gracious service. The event that could have ended with mere termination had instead initiated a revolution in the hospitality sector, all because Karoline had understood that the best response to disrespect isn't punishment, but education, and that sometimes the best lessons in life are learned from our most painful experience. If you liked this video about leadership and change, please like and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting content about business leaders who are changing the notion of success through passion and creativity. Leave your comments below regarding instances when being underestimated had brought about unintended positive developments in your life or career.